all of our kids have non-Christian friends. All of our kids are, of course, interacting, but it's not in ways, at least now as we've homeschooled, it's not in ways that's overwhelming to them.
This is from Vanessa. The question is, what will happen to non-believing kids in public school if many Christian families decide to pull their kids out and homeschool? Is my child called to be a light, or is protecting them the goal? It's a good question.
What will happen is what is already happening now. So, I mean, you look at the last 20, 30 years and say we've had our kids, our Christian kids, in the public school system. And what's resulted? Well, clearly, the Christian kids haven't overwhelmed, the public system and their peers with such powerful examples of salt and light that we've now made a huge difference in public education, and we've changed the trajectory of public education. I mean, so we've seen what has happened with kids in that school, in that setting. And the problem is, I think, look, are we supposed to be salt and light? Yes, we are. The churches and individual Christians are, but at what point do we say, hey, we're salt and light? Because I can guarantee you that the 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old who's now in first grade or kindergarten, who's now being taught by a teacher with a particular agenda when it comes to gender, is teaching them her gender ideology or whatever, is not equipped to be salt and light in that kind of situation. And if we think about any kind of training program or any activity or a sport or the armed forces or anything, what do we do before we send people into the job they're going into, or into battle, or whatever it might be, or into that athletic competition? We realize that nobody is immediately ready for that thing until they have the proper amount of training.
Yeah.
And so I think what's happened is in the culture, we've had Christian institutions, institutions that were friendly to Christianity, a culture that was more Christianized and at least had some shared Christian values rooted in kind of a Judeo-Christian ethic. That culture has changed over the last 30, 40 years. It used to be friendly, pro-Christianity. It changed, and now it's no longer pro. It's not even neutral. It's actively hostile towards the Christian view. And so that's what we're sending our kids into. And when they're 5, 6, 12, 13, 14, they're not ready for the avalanche of challenges that they're going to face. So what would happen is, we're not going to see, we've already seen what the result is when we keep our kids in there without the proper training. And so we may be at a point culturally, and I think we are, where we have to rethink education and rethink how we're salt and light. Because my vision of this is that we're sending kids in well-intentioned to be salt and light, but we're sending them into this battlefield. They're not prepared, they're not trained, and they're just getting mowed down. And we're losing kid after kid after kid. And so at what point do we say, this is not working, we've got to change our strategy. We've got to, maybe for a while, circle up the wagons, figure out how are we going to equip kids to be salt and light, because it doesn't just come naturally for any of us believers. I mean, think about if we adults say, think about how difficult it is to be salt and light. We go, yeah, it's a challenge. It's tough. There's all these kind of issues you got to face. Now put that on a kid, the kids aren't ready for that. So education can be a very powerful way to equip them for that. So I think we have to rethink education.
Well, and also I think too, school isn't the only place that kids can be salt and light too, right? So it's almost like we don't have to depend on that. And the public school kids, they're getting the indoctrination from everywhere anyway. And so, maybe there's more intentional ways that we can reach out to kids in other families that may not, have access to this truth and the biblical worldview.
That was part of my thoughts when I hear that question is that's a lot of pressure to put on a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old to go out and be salt and light. I mean, as adults, we know in a work environment, if we're in an office, where it's all non-Christians and there's just kind of an atmosphere that's difficult as a Christian to live in. We know how hard that is as an adult.
Yeah.
And so what are we doing to our kids to say, hey, this is your job, to go and be a light in your second grade classroom? To an 8-year-old, I know we don't say that, but how overwhelming is that? And then also too, we have 5 kids. We have done public school and private school, and we've homeschooled. And so we've done all the things. And in our time homeschooling, to your point, Alisa, it's not as if our kids, when we homeschool, they're not actually locked in the closet. We let them out.
You do?
We do. It's crazy.
Well,
you mean they can talk?
5.
Can they talk to other people?
4 out of the 5 we let out.
Yeah.
So they are involved not only in the neighborhood with kids, but sports and clubs and all kinds of things. All of our kids have non-Christian friends. All of our kids are, of course, interacting. But it's not in ways, at least now as we've homeschooled, it's not in ways that's overwhelming to them. And it's in ways where our daughter goes on a bike ride with our neighbor, and then she comes back and she talks about this conversation that she had with her about God and whether it makes sense to believe in God. And so it's not like it's an all day, 8 hours a day kind of thing, but they're able to engage in small ways in being a light. And actually our youngest son was just had a football season that ended, a flag football season that ended. And one of the little boys on the team said to our son, these are 10-year-olds, but he said, "You're the nicest kid I've ever met." Oh. And he said, "Everyone at school makes fun of me and each other. Like we all make fun of each other." And he's like, you're like the only person who doesn't do that.
Wow.
Now, our son is not perfect. Like he's 10 years old. But so I would argue, now see, that was being a light in the community in a small way that I think is age appropriate for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And then going back to the schools, just the last point, I think, our job as Christians is to be teachers in the public school, to be administrators. We can be salt and light in the public school. I don't know anyone who's advocating for all Christians pull out of the public school, don't teach, don't be principals, don't be teachers' assistants. And I don't even know how many people that I know, Christians who are in the public school, who are loving kids, who are being lights, and they're being the salt and light in the public school in a way that a second grader can't.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good.